thing. When you print this, I believe it used to say Ella Kennedy. Now it says Ellen Kirk. And then it says I. And then there's like an S thrown in there. And when you print it, it becomes so obvious that this was actually then changed to Kirk. And so it was originally recorded in 1998. The dissolution, so basically it's the dissolving of Landmark Inc. And what everybody fails to realize is it actually had created and reinstated this fake Landmark Inc. from the 60s, because this was part of the Cold War plot. And that fake Landmark Inc. merges with this real Landmark Inc. After Jeffrey Epstein had made himself the power of attorney over the fake Landmark Inc. Anyways, this was the Cold War plot, and I guess the CIA was all about it, especially because George H.W. Bush, without question, replaces John Kennedy as the kind of beneficiary of the coal, interest. But let's go back to this document because it's very important. What it was changed to is Ellen Kirk. And then it's re-recorded again. Do you see this? So the second re-record is 2013. Well, guess what happens, everybody? So we have, and sorry about this, and I think it was Jeffrey Smith at one point, and we can go through. Jeffrey uses a lot of different aliases. I have not looked up Jeffrey Strosberg. I don't want to waste everybody's time. I have looked up Ellen Kirk. If you actually look up Ellen Kirk, holy crap. She works at a variety of different places affiliated with this plot, which was absolutely leading up to 9/11 and hijacking key securities that basically allowed for the liquidation and hijacking of major U.S. corporations. Not to mention, opening up policies, backdating them, terrorism policies on like the World Trade Center. Holy crap. Good to see Westfield was behind that, AKA, oh my goodness. Okay, so there are no board members, it says, of this country mark. It basically just exists as the sole shareholder of this new entity. Well, of course, it goes belly up, and dissolves. But let's focus on Jeffrey Stroberg, right? President. And then we have Ellen Kirk, I.S. And then we have Joe K., which I imagine back in the day was Joe Kennedy, And then we have Steve Patton, a.k.a., which would be Samuel Patton. I think it would be Sam Bush back in the day. But Joe Koch, if you're not familiar with the last name, they go hand in hand with the Bushes. So it's like Bush. So this plot was essentially brought back to motion in 1981, and I can confirm it because they use the same freaking entities. They go away and come back and go away. And then because George Bush and then Taft, it wouldn't have mattered even if we wouldn't have elected Bush and Cheney. It would have been Kerry and somebody else. That's the way that the Royals had made sure that this came down, so that the third time's a charm. This was their last and final try before the internet age came along. So this used to be through digital faxes and a few different ways back in the 60s. I think technology it has advanced in support of this plot, just because the money is so tremendous. And it is truly the taking of America. But so MC and then Stewart, but MC used to be Robert Maxwell. It's kind of like little MC. But Ellen, she works at Landmark Entertainment, which is great. Landmark Entertainment. Well, if you're familiar with Lehman Brothers, right? So there's Lehman Brothers Holdings, and then this Brookwood Energy and Properties. And it's a great illustration of kind of how the Rockefeller plot worked, especially ahead of 9/11. I'm not sure if this is the way it worked in the 60s, but it seems to appear that way. So what they do is they basically are setting up one entity that will fold and liquidate assets from the other entity into it. And then they're going to be paying out royalties or bounties. Sometimes, Jeffrey Epstein and the plot, members sometimes do that. So they're setting up one entity with an expiration date, and they're always backdating kind of the new entity with the original date that the first and original, authentic business had been incorporated. So this is basically this form, and of course they're all. So this is 1998 backdating a form to 96 where there's no revenue, right? And it looks like there's 300 million shares, and that's about $23 billion, right? Got it? And this is Erwin Eisenberg. Elvado is Diamond Access. Okay, and then over here is 10,000 shares, which would be the Series A or the founders shares. And what you're looking at here, it's basically the conversion of Farm Bureau original Series A shares. And one is basically George H. Dunlap. And then the other one would be the Dunlap family. But this is also the value of those shares with all the other stuff that came along with it, land, blah, 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 mineral rights. So the coal was worth trillions. Got it? So, anyways, but the shares were worth quite a bit. Yep. So they set up a nationwide variable account, and it's recorded in 1998, backdated to 81. And that's important because Prince Charles and the Queen, they originally had been doing this through Wallis Simpson, who claims she was a Spencer. They're like distant cousins to the Spencers, the Dunlap family. But they set up nationwide life insurance as a fake entity. Like a fake entity. Like it's a Rockefeller shell corp that was brought back to life after being canceled in the 60s when they caught that there was security fraud going on. The Dunlap family was very much aware of that. What they weren't aware is the bigger plot that it had included a plot to basically kill off the remaining members. This was the CIA plot, to kidnap, remember the kidnap? Anyways. So then they create this variable account, and then they split that. And that is linked in to numerous banks, but with the minerals always going, to Chemical Bank. The target here was the coal. And wouldn't you believe that it is in 1977 that George H. Dunlap is working with the federal government on the Clean Water Act, and the president approaches him about sealing the coal or making it federally federally managed so that so the Farmington mine explosion and the extraction of this, unregulated, which is what occurred in the 60s, would never happen again. And here, Nixon resigns. Remember? I think that Nixon resigns solely so they get Ford and Nelson Rockefeller into the White House to set up all of that coal being transferred actually to a third-party trust. Well, I already know. That's exactly what happened. But this is where I believe it's under Kirk. Watch this. So, Jeffrey Epstein's power of attorney is recorded in 1999, backdated to 1991. Oh, I've got to show you. When you open it up, this stuff, you guys, it's Charlie Kirk. I'll show you. But it's backdated because if you're going to backdate something or claim assets from George H. Dunlap's, death per se, you have to backdate it. But all of a sudden you start to realize that Robert Maxwell falling off the boat in 99 or 91 when George H. Poppy, Big Poppy was in office was when they were kicking this off. Does that make sense? It started in 81 and they got caught. So they had to shoot Arthur Shapiro because they were going to be under investigation. And the whole plot always ended in Cuyahoga. Well, you'll see. Wouldn't you believe that Jeffrey Epstein's father, despite being born in New York and living in Florida, dies in Cleveland in 91. So we have George H. Dunlap that passes away in March 25th, and then, March 27th. And then Robert Maxwell falls off the boat. But right after, it's the month that George passes away. Actually, I think it's the week that he passes away. Robert Maxwell stops in New York just to say hello to everybody. And then he dies. And he's on his boat named Ghislaine. Yep. And then Seymour dies on the 14th.